Super safe and
And good afternoon, good evening, my fellow Rotary types, and welcome back to 2023. Happy New Year to those of you I haven't spoken to yet. So yes, well, hello. It's 2023. We're still here. Things are good. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So how are we all? Are you good? Are you good? Are you welcome? Are you still reading? Have you done your homework? Yes. So I'm going to single anybody out who hasn't done their homework. Because you've had plenty of time. No excuses. See me after class if you haven't done it. Bribes will be accepted, of course. But no, I mean, I have actually. I have done my homework because I'm good, me. So we'll crack on. But we can read a bit of it together because it's been fun. It's been fun. Does Audible listening count? Yes, it does. Yes, I'm quite happy to accept Audible. That'll do. That'll do. No worries. So but nobody's got any excuses. You've had plenty of time, so slap. Anyway, we must do the thing because the thing is the thing. And crack on. Have a Boo Boo is first in the chat with 4 thumbs up. Well done. Thank you very much. Have a Boo Boo. The Arrakis is here. Did you fend off the invasion of the Harkonnen successfully, by the way, Arrakis? Because we were quite concerned for you because you did the beer in the last stream on Saturday. We feared the invasion had at last become a success and you were no more. But it turns out you're okay, so that's good. Glenn is here. Hello, Glenn. Good to see you. Drew's Day returns. It does indeed. It does indeed. Yes, it's still here for the foreseeable. Commander Tragic Blue 21 is here. Wintermute GB, of course he is, but hasn't done his homework. The Harkonnens are here. Excellent. Obviously failed their invasion of Arrakis, but came much closer than they have done in the past, it would seem. Von der Brute is here as well. 07. Few fellows, whoever's here, welcome. Von der Brute as well. Commander Sea Dweller is here as well. Have we all done our reading? Well, I hope some of you have done your reading. Because we'll probably get more out of it if we've actually read the story. Commander Dusklord is here as well. Mad Monksoft is here as well. The crew is here. We have Big 39 GT is here. Arrakis says he was lucky the bed won. We were getting a bit worried that we might be stretching this analogy a little bit too far, so I think we'll move swiftly on. So how is everybody? Oh, we're good. I am still wearing my Christmas... Well, it's not really a Christmas jumper. It's my 8-bit jumper. Because it's still cold. It's got cold again today. The heating cut back in. So cold it was. So I had to, so the jumper's back, and I've got 2. I'm not I didn't really need to show you, but I've got 2 layers on. Look, well, 3 layers on now, because it's chilly. Definitely gone cold again. The sky is clear. The moon is out. The stars are out. It's very, very, very cold indeed. So yes, looking forward to the spring. I'm like an onion. I have many layers. It's just my personality that's the problem. Ah dear, never mind. So we were for 2023. We were moving the writing stream in a slightly. I know, Sean, you live in the uttermost north of the uttermost, and it's must be ridiculously freezing cold up here. I mean, I've had to put a jumper on. That's how cold it's got down here. You think you're cold? Sheesh, you southerns know nothing. Yeah, one of these days I may be in Scotland, and then I can go, aha, it's not as bad as you Scottish people make out. He says, hopefully. So, well, I guess we'll see. So I've long considered that Scottish people lie about the weather quite a lot to basically keep the English out. That's what I think it's all about. Mad Monksov says cake also has theirs. It does. Cake is good. Cake is not a lie, as it turns out. There you go. And Alan's here as well. Hello, Alan. Good to see you. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back to the writing stream. For those of you who haven't joined us before, you're welcome to the Madhouse. As per usual, but we're going in a new direction for 2023. We're going to be doing we're becoming a book club. I don't know if there's such anything else like that on Twitch. Maybe we'll be the #1 book club Twitch stream. You never know. We're picking a book, or at least some of a book, each week. And the idea being that we have a read of it, and then we have a bit of a chat on here about what we think of it, and so forth. Now, one of the advantages we have is that there are a lot of free books out there, and especially some of the older stuff. And what I mean by older stuff is properly old, i.e. out of copyright because the author has died. And tonight, because this is mostly a sort of science fiction and fantasy sort of stream, virtually 100% science fiction and fantasy, we're going to start with a classic sci-fi, probably almost a foundational novel for all sci-fi things. 2023 has started well. We have not been invaded by aliens yet. Oh, well, that's all to come. The rest of the stream. Try living there for a while. It's Baltic most of the time. Okay. But there we go. So yes, we are going to be reviewing H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. Bum bum bum. Dun 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 dun. Sorry, that's the theatrical version, shall I say? And so we did post a link up last year. So doubtless because everybody's done their homework clearly. The idea of this is that you read at least some of it in advance, and then we chat through the themes and we explore the possibilities and basically react to it. I have got a MIDI version of it actually. I should have dug that out, shouldn't I? I don't think the problem is the MIDI versions. Oh, hang on a minute. Have I got the? I might have the rendition. Hang on, bear with me a moment. You never know. It might still be, because if it's anywhere, it'll be in my Law Tour thing that I did. Law Tour. Yeah, well, probably 2 years. Was it 2 years ago now I did that? Somewhere around that. Where would I have filed it? I don't know. On the games? No, it wouldn't be on the games. It should be in here somewhere. Must be under Really Dangerous. There we go. Law Tour. There we go. Have I still got? I'm pretty sure. Did I do one? Well, yeah, I did. Did I save it as an MP3 that would that would work? Although that would give me a copyright ban. But hey, you can only live once, can't you? Let me. Here we go. It's up here somewhere. Dun 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 dun. I don't know what this will sound like. It might sound really, really bad. I haven't done this for. Well, hang on. If I mix it down to an MP3 file, it will be able to play. Because the problem with the my MIDI compositor thingamajig is it doesn't play nicely with OBS for reasons. So what? You're not allowed to save it there because reasons. Right. Anyway, saving now. There we go. I've started. Yeah, I found it. Yeah, it's all Sean's fault. We might as well. We might as well get. We might as well get that out of the way because everybody. Oh, hang on. Windows encountered the error playing this file. That doesn't sound well, does it? Bumper. Right, let's try that again. Is it going to work? Oh, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Oh, that's annoying. Let's try that again. If it doesn't work this time, I'll give up. Let's try it as a WMA file. Maybe it doesn't. Should work. Maybe it's possibly because it's all screwed up because of OBS. Windows won't let you play Copyright Strike. My birth town even gets a mention in World of the Worlds. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. Let's try. It doesn't seem to like it. Don't know why. I might have to investigate that after the stream. That's just weird. Well, no, it's working. There it goes. Ba, ba, ba. It must have been because I had the program open. So this is my slightly dodgy MIDI version. I did a long time ago. I could probably do a better one now. I think we all know what this is all about. Anyway, so this is Jeff Wayne's amazing orchestral version, or musical version, shall I say, of War of the Worlds, which I've always trumpeted as being very close to the original story, and it is. It's set in the same time frame, and it's basically got the same sort of basic story, but actually there's quite a lot of embellishment. I was quite surprised to find, having reread the original book now. So there we go. Anyway, that's bam, bam, bam. That's enough of that. All good stuff. All good stuff. Right. So I need to pop up the book. Hang on. I think I've got the button there. Does that work now? You can't see because I've got a crazy screen display. You can't see. Let me just switch the display. How do I do the desktop colory thing? I used to know how all this stuff worked, but I don't know how it works. Display? Should be display. Where's the display? Background. Background image settings. There we go. Let's just go for a black image setting. Solid colour. There we go. Perfect. Then you'll be able to see. Oh, now my head's in front of the chat. That won't do either. Hang on. Let me fix that. The chat box needs to be at the top. There we go. Actually, that looks a bit daft. Shall I move that up? I don't know why is it there? Stupid thing. Right, let's turn that down to 1,000. There we go. Right, start chatting away, and that's hopefully I'll fix that. Dramatic moments of truth. Just remember to keep talking to get copyright. No, so hopefully my MIDI rendition will be so appallingly bad that that it doesn't trigger the copyright strike. I must admit I've never had a copyright strike on Twitch. I don't think my MIDI files have been up to the job for that. But I have had copyright warnings on YouTube saying you are infringing somebody else's copyright. But there we go. Anyway, so this is, and I don't know what cover art this is, but it's quite nice cover art. I quite like it. So this is the Gutenberg ebook of the War of the Worlds. So yeah, on the tours, it was YouTube. As I went back and had a look, it was actually YouTube. I checked my Twitch stuff, and it didn't give me a copyright strike on Twitch. It was only YouTube that gave me the copyright warning. So I don't know. Maybe Twitch doesn't police it quite so carefully. I don't know. But anyway, waffles. Right. So this is War of the Worlds. Gutenberg. You can see look. It's book number 36. So it must be one of the early ones here. So H.G. Wells. Now, the one thing I didn't look up is H.G. Wells himself. What is his name? I couldn't remember. Herbert George. There he is. So he was born in 1866 and died in August 1946. So comfortably predates any of us, I'm pretty sure. Unless there's any of you who were born before 1946, which is fairly unlikely, I think. But yeah, no, there might be some. This he's quite often regarded as one of the, if not the one of the fathers of science fiction. This book was not released in 2004. That must be when the ebook came out. The actual book, War of the Worlds, original book. There we go. It came out in Look there. So there's a copy of it there with the colour art. First serialised in 1897. So it's actually a 19th century book. It's not even a 20th century book. It's 1897. So that is 126 years ago. So we're reading a book that is 126 years old, which is a long old time, isn't it? I mean, that predates. I'm just thinking. Well, it's Queen Victoria's reign in the UK. In the UK, we still had an empire, of course, back then. This is pre-World War One. It's not far after the Boer War, is it? What's when was that? Yeah, well, it's around that time actually. Okay, so there we are. The second Boer War, 1899 to 1902. So yeah, it's that sort of era. Okay, because Queen Victoria was not amused. Bing wallpaper. I noticed the background's been switched off. It's not off. It's okay. Its computer's off. So that sort of dates it. So this is pre-20th century. And a long time ago. So, you have to give the book a certain amount of, a certain allowance for the fact it was written in 1890, in 1897. But I must admit, having read through it, I was surprised at how well H.G. Wells had done his research, actually. He was clearly a very switched on guy and had access to some pretty good research materials, because he did a very, very good job. And from his perspective, he's looking forward into the 19th century. So what technology did they have back then? Well, this is pre a lot of mechanization. It's not all of it. So big things that they would have noticed in the 19th century, really, of course, are the railways replacing urbanised transport and that kind of stuff. The railway is making a big impact in the UK. Obviously, the Industrial Revolution has happened by this point, but the big wars of the 20th century, all in the future. You've still got a lot of steam-powered ships at this point in time. There's no, petrol, diesel cars are in the future. Airplanes are in the future. All that sort of stuff is in the future. That's your sort of level of technology that he's writing at, trying to be a science fiction writer, looking forward to what would a superior technology look like. And there's lots of fascinating little scintillating details in War of the Worlds that I had missed. I hadn't spotted these before. And so I suppose I was reading it this time with a view to, okay, what am I going to talk about on the stream tonight? And I was like, this is really good. This is really interesting. So anyway, let's get into it. War of the Worlds. So the way it's organised on Gutenberg is quite nice. So this is the HTML version. You can jump to the chapters. So and you can download it as an ebook. So if you haven't already read it, there's loads of ways to get it. Just the plain text. You can get a Kindle version, EPUB for any other readers. Any of these you can then save and put as a PDF and various other bits and pieces. So there's no excuse for not having read it. And he writes it. The other thing that's quite interesting about this is I'd forgotten this. He writes it as the character that he is. The character in the story is a narrator. Okay. And he's writing it after. It's like the narrator here is writing the story after the events. I think he says it's 6 years, somewhere in this early part of the book, and he says things like here. It's like it's curious. Yeah, there we go. It's curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. So he's looking back, which is an interesting storytelling technique. He's not doing it. It's not. It's kind of like not like a dramatized. Present tense sort of story. It's happening now. These are the events as I recall them, and he chops over to his brother at one point, and he chops over to other people. And so he's a journalist. That's exactly right. So it happened to him, but he's writing it kind of almost after the event. I mean, and this is the classic line, obviously at the beginning. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that you just got that classic bam bam bam. You just can't avoid it, can you? But it isn't actually. Oddly enough, this first paragraph has been edited quite a bit for that musical. So this text is quite verbose by modern standards, but it isn't nearly as bad as some of H.G. Wells' sort of contemporaries. It's actually, what I was quite pleased with this is, quite delighted when I read it, is it's actually really accessible. I did come across a couple of words. I went, I don't know what that means. I'm going to have to look that one up. So we'll go into those in a minute. But it's written really well. It's written in a very readable way, considering it's 126 years old. It's way more accessible than a lot of novels of the time, I think. It's not got some of that the sort of stuff that Jules Verne does a lot of, which is this really sort of verbose sentence, which feels like it takes an entire paragraph to get to the point. When you get to the end of the sentence, you're gone, I've forgotten how this paragraph started. Which is very common in sort of 19th century stuff. Jules Verne is way, way harder to read than this. This is actually much, much more accessible, which I was quite delighted with, actually. So, which is good, because H.G. Wells has written a lot of other cool stuff as well, which we'll get into in time. If you want verbose, try reading Clive Barker's books. Yeah, definitely try those. So no one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. That men busied themselves about the various concerns they were scrutinised and studied. And here's the word that I didn't know coming up here. It is possible that the infusoria, I wonder what that, I'm going to have to look that one up in a moment, under the microscope. I assume that's a 19th century word for I don't know, microscopic life or something. I've not come across that one. So infusoria. So there we go. Actually, is it a specific type of microorganism? Or was it just okay? So infusoria are minute freshwater life forms including ciliates, euglenoids, protozoa, unicellular algae, and small invertebrates. There we go. Okay. I didn't know what that was. So yeah, Robs, you're quite right. The character is a journalist. So whether H.G. Wells wrote this as a journalist, and did it in a journalistic style deliberately, I'm not entirely sure. But he. If he did, he's done a good job because it's very journalistic in style, which is great. He's kind of bringing you on board. I particularly like this second paragraph here. The planet Mars, as I scarcely need to remind the reader. Okay, yeah, bringing us on board. So it's quite good. And you can infer the meaning of the word from the context, but I hadn't come across it before. This is the other thing, and the I didn't know that they knew this sort of stuff back then, and I'm going to have to dig out some of my astronomy stuff and have a review, because Mars, I scarcely need to remind a reader, revolves around the Sun a mean distance of 140 million miles, and the light and heat it receives from the Sun is barely half that received from this world. Now that is actually that's accurate. Okay, I was quite surprised. I thought that might be completely wrong, but it isn't. It's like I didn't realise that they'd worked out how far away Mars was back then, but they had, and he's got it correct. He's got it correct, and he says a mean distance, which of course mean in this is Old English for average. In fact, mean is a type of average, so it's not it's not mean distance. It's average distance, but he's bang on, and the light and heat it receives from the Sun is barely half that received by this. Well, he's right again. So. Now, and there's some other little fantastic, fascinating little insights of astronomical stuff in here, which is now incorrect, but it shows where he was or what he was reading as his kind of background documentation. It must be if the nebula hypothesis. Now I don't know what I've looked this up. That night is good. Yeah, but he didn't. Galileo knew about Mars, but they didn't know the distance. I mean, how do you measure the distance of Mars, right? How do you do that? Without, I don't know. I mean, we worked out the distance to the. Did we? Did we work out the distance to Mars when and the planets and stuff? How do we do that prior to spacecraft and radio and stuff? Tape measures. It's very messy, really, really quickly. Is it parallax? I don't know. I mean, questions, right? I didn't think we had good estimates for how far Mars was away until we had kind of interplanetary radar. We started bouncing things off. So I don't know how it was done, but they obviously did do it. And this H.G. Wells made a very, very, very good guess. But I'm assuming it's something to do with the orbits, i.e. they knew that the Earth went around the Sun obviously once a year, Mars goes around every 2 years. And they knew about the inverse square law about, then, various other stuff. And how do we measure distance to Mars? They use the parallax method to calculate the distance to Mars with surprising accuracy. So Mad Monksoft, there you go. Okay, so Mad Monksoft always finds the answer. Poor Queen Vic's measuring tape. Cassini and Richter measured the distance to Mars by parallax in the 1600s. Did they? Okay, so they did it by parallax, right? Okay, so you basically take two far away points on the Earth, and you use presumably trigonometry, and you have a baseline of the Earth. You know how far away the 2 points on the Earth are, and then you basically it's a very, 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 very elongated triangle. I suppose that makes sense. You can do it with trigonometry. Okay, so that was done. I didn't know that either. So that's good. Now, and it must be if the nebula hypothesis. Okay, so I don't know what the nebula, really, really, really large triangles. I don't know what the nebula hypothesis was. What I'm assuming here was that which is still kind of correct to a degree, is that the solar system condensed out of the solar nebula, from which the Sun was originally formed. But they obviously had a theory at the time that this nebula cooled from the outside towards the centre. And if the nebula hypothesis has any truth, older than our world, and long before this Earth ceased to be molten, life upon its surface must have begun its course. Now, obviously, some of this is fiction, so you've got to be a bit careful, but the fact that it's scarcely 1/7 of the volume of the Earth must have accelerated its cooling to the temperature at which life could begin. And it goes on somewhere else that basically Mars cooled down way faster than the Earth did because it was further out, which isn't quite right, but it's actually quite interesting. And basically, so Mars was a much older world than the Earth, so any life forms upon it had plenty more time to do their stuff than we did. So the nebula hypothesis is the idea that the spinning cloud of dust made of mostly light elements called a nebula flattened into protoplanetary disk and became a solar system consisting of a star with orbiting planets. So that was still pretty much how we thought things worked up until the sort of 70s. It's a bit more complicated than that, unfortunately, but that's where they were in the late 19th century. So he's right on the money with the cutting edge science of the time, and that's the kind of point I suppose I was trying to make. They've obviously done some observations of Mars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He basically talks about Mars is a dying planet, therefore the Martians have decided to invade the Earth, and they're basically going to carry warfare towards us. To carry warfare sunward is indeed their only escape from the destruction that generation after generation creeps upon them. Their planet is basically dying. And they're coming to Earth, and they've got oceans, they've got clouds, and they've got green stuff. We're going to have that. That's ours. I skipped over it, I think, but in my humble opinion, the best line of chapter 1: intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded this Earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against it. Yeah, that's up here, isn't it? That is a good bit. It's all in this first section, and that's how the. That's just before the dum, isn't it? To cross the gulf of space. There it is. Yet across the gulf of space, minds that to our minds is ours, to those beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic. That's quite good, isn't it? Unsympathetic. They don't care. about any suffering they might cause. Regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. Bum, bum, bum. It's just it's got to be done. So they're coming for our planet. They don't really give us a monkey about us at all. But it's a lovely piece of the thing about writing advice in general that I've given on the stream in the past for any wannabe authors is always make your first paragraph really, really good so it captures the imagination of the reader. Right now, H.G. Wells clearly did that. He knew what he was doing. Because this first paragraph is probably one of the best sci-fi hooks ever, isn't it? I mean, no one would have believed, but I'm telling you guys that this really happened. Okay, there are some really nasty big bad aliens out there who don't give a monkeys about you, and they're coming this way. Yes, it's brilliant. It's really, really good. Okay, the relative distances of the planets were worked out using geometry before Cassini. So once they'd worked out the distance of Mars, the distances between all the other planets fell into place. Okay, so that's all kind of... Galileo figured they went around the sun, didn't he? Then was that? Hang on. Galileo observed them through a telescope. Copernicus figured out they went around the sun. Kepler figured out they went round in ellipses. So it's all. I need to go back and put all that in order, don't I? But okay. So basically, some very smart people did some smart stuff long before the 20th century, is what we're saying. Okay? So this is where H.G. Wells gets a little bit political. At least I think he does. It says here, and we men. And obviously a product of its time, men as in mankind. At least I assume that's what he means. And we men, the creatures who inhabit this earth, must be to them at least as alien and lowly as are the monkeys and lemurs to us. Okay, so that's drawing a comparison. The intellectual side of man already admits that life is an incessant struggle for existence, and it would seem that this too is the belief of the minds upon Mars. Their world is far gone in its cooling, and this world is still crowded with life, but crowded only with what they regard as inferior animals. Eyes. So that's basically what the Martians think of us. And then he goes on, and this is really good. And before we judge them too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not upon only animals, such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but on its inferior races. Ow, 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 ow. Okay, maybe that would be toned down a little bit in the modern translation. Now, this is interesting here. The Tasmanians, okay, in spite of their human likeness, okay, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain that the Martians warred in the same spirit? Now, who is he referring to here? I'm assuming the Tasmanians are indigenous, what we would now refer today as indigenous Aborigines in Tasmania. Is that correct? Interesting that he says inferior races, which is obviously an endemic, superiority consideration of Europeans. It's racist just by writing it. It just shows the product of the society in which H.G. Wells was. I don't know clearly, but I would imagine that he was a fairly enlightened kind of a fellow for his time. But you can see in just that phrase, what they thought and what was accepted as norm back then. So that's quite interesting. So I'm assuming this is Aboriginal Tasmanians, and he's making a comment about it. I mean, he's appalled by it, which is good, but. We Europeans exterminated them in 50 years. Should we be surprised the Martians come and do the same thing? So Alan, okay. So Commander C12, the indigenous Tasmanians disappeared after colonial influence around the time. In later interviews, H.G. said it influenced the story. Okay, so it's kind of flipping. Yeah, he's making a point. There was a deliberate plan to wipe out Tasmanian Aborigines by settlers walking in a line with guns across the island. Was there really? God. So it's he doesn't go into it too much. He lets the story talk for itself, but he mentions it there. And I hadn't spotted that in previous readings. I'd kind of obviously skipped past it without really noticing. But this time, because I'm reading it, I suppose, with a critical eye, looking for things to talk about on the stream. That really jumped out at me as as a kind of okay, wow, okay, well that's 19th century view of the world and what's going on, but it was obviously current at the time. So interesting, very interesting to see the context of what the story is written in. The Martians seem to have calculated their descent with amazing subtlety. Their mathematical learning is evidently far in excess of ours. Okay, so what he's basically saying is they have the ability to launch spacecraft, all kind of spacecraft, from Mars to Earth, and with a high degree of success. Okay, they managed to get a whole bunch of spacecraft to land on the Earth, so which actually is surprisingly difficult. It's much easier to, if you know your astronomy, to go outwards from a planet than it is to go inwards, which sounds slightly counterintuitive, but it's because of the speeds of the planets. The faster the planets orbit at higher speeds, the closer in they get. Mercury whips around the sun in about I don't know how many days it is. Pretty fast compared to. Obviously the Earth takes 365 days. I think Mercury takes only 90 or something, or 100 days or something. So the velocity of the inner planets is that much higher because they're close to the sun, which means that in order to get in, you have it's weird. You actually have to lose velocity because otherwise you go in too fast. So I don't know if HT. Back in the 19th century, I don't think they would have had any kind of rocket science calculations done at that point, because firing as we find out in the story, firing a missile, what is effectively a projectile, it's not a rocket. He hasn't got rockets in this. They actually fire a projectile at the Earth. That's how the aliens invade. That wouldn't work. They did have Newtonian physics, didn't they? Obviously Newton, but I don't know if that H.G. Wells was necessarily completely au fait with that, because the method he describes wouldn't work. So because basically they have a massive gun. Imagine the takeoff G-forces, because basically there's no the way it's described is there's no propulsion mechanism on the spacecraft itself. It's basically fired out of a gun on the ground. So all the velocity that you need has to come from the initial launch, which of course doesn't make sense if you've got to try and slow down. So it really is a 1 in a million shot. But they did know about ballistics, exactly. So that's probably what he was referring to. So that's an interesting note of where the science hasn't quite worked. And here's the 6 years reference. I've just found it. Okay, so the storm burst upon us 6 years ago now. So he's writing it from the journalist looking back on events that have happened. And as Mars approached opposition, that's correct, that happens, Lavelle of Java set the wires of the astronomical exchange palpitating. That's a good word, palpitating. Let's do some palpitating tonight. With the amazing intelligence of a huge outbreak of incandescent gas upon the planet. Okay, so they're using telescopes to observe it. It had occurred towards the midnight of the 12th near spectroscope. Cool. Okay, so they've got a spectroscope on it. To which he had once resorted, indicated a mass of flaming gas, chiefly hydrogen. Okay, so that's quite good. So he knew hydrogen was explosive, so it makes a sense that maybe a projectile would be launched with some kind of hydrogen explosion. Moving with an enormous velocity towards the Earth, this jet of fire had become visible about 12:15, and he compared it to a colossal puff of flame suddenly and violently squirted out to the planet as flaming gases rushed out of a gun. So it's basically a massive hydrogen gun is the way it works. Interesting enough, he makes reference to newspapers that still exist today. So yet the next day there was nothing of this in the papers except a little note in the Daily Telegraph. The Daily Telegraph, for those who are not in the UK, still exists. It's still a real newspaper. It's a very right-wing newspaper, but it still exists. And then we get introduced to Ogilvy, the well-known astronomer at Ottershaw. Now, Ottershaw is a real place as well, in Surrey. I think it's Surrey. Yeah, it's Surrey, isn't it? And he was immensely excited at the news, and in excess of his feelings, invited me to take a turn with him that night in scrutiny of the Red Planet. So he basically gets invited to go and have a look at the telescope. He does see it. And he's got this lovely description of looking at objects through a telescope, which makes me suspect that H.G. Wells was fairly familiar with a telescope, because he describes it very accurately. This bit's quite good here. So the steady ticking of the clockwork of the telescope. You might think, well, why has a telescope got clockwork? Well, the reason that would have been the case in the 19th century is today we have electronics that do this for us, but in the 19th century a telescope would have actually been run by a clock in order for the telescope to turn at the same rate of the Earth. Effectively, the drive mechanism for the telescope would have been a 24-hour clock, which moved the telescope to align with the rotation of the Earth, so you could keep focused on a particular object as the sky rotated above you, and you'd hear the clockwork of the telescope. And so his description here, where does it say? It was as if it quivered, but this really was the telescope vibrating with the activity of the clockwork that kept the planet in view. That is totally correct. That's exactly what you would see in the 19th century telescope. So that's quite good. You know how that blackness looks like on a frosty starlit night? In a telescope, it seems far profounder and invisible to me because it was so remote. Flying swiftly and steadily towards me across that incredible distance, drawing near every minute by many thousands of miles, came the thing they were sending to us, the thing that was to bring so much struggle and calamity and death to the Earth. That bit there, the blackness on a frosty starlit night in a telescope seems far profounder. That is very true. Have you ever had the chance to look through a telescope at a series of stars? The blackness beyond the stars does seem deeper in a weird sort of way in a telescope. So H.G. Wells must have actually been fairly familiar with using telescopes, which again is nice to me. It's good when a science fiction writer knows his beans, if you know, knows his tech. And although the tech is very old, he was familiar with it. You can tell that the way he writes. There's a wonderful description that you bypassed. The shadowed lantern throwing a feeble glow upon the floor in the corner. Where's that? Okay. There's lots of good writing in here. It really does set a scene. So there we go. I still remember that vigil very distinctly. The black and silent observatory. That is correct. That's an interesting observation. How often have you seen in sci-fi movies the inside of a telescopic observatory being brightly lit by lots of arc lights? That's not how telescopes work, right? You've got to have the telescope in darkness, because any reflection of light will screw up the telescope. It will bounce around inside the tube eventually, and then it will blot out. So you don't have lights inside an observatory when you're doing observing. It's dark. You have to the entire observatory is dark. Yeah, that's the point. Good for cameras and sci-fi, but not realistic. Okay, so this is realism. It's quite good, this bit. Black and silent observatory, quiet, dark. Okay. This one for sure. So the shadowed lanterns throwing a feeble glow upon the floor in the corner, just enough light so you can kind of not trip over stuff. The ticking of the clock of the telescope I've already mentioned. The little slit in the roof, which is basically where the telescope's pointing out of. Ogilvy moved about, invisible but audible. Okay, so it's so dark in this observatory you can't actually see him, but you can hear him shuffling about doing whatever he's doing. And that's how telescopes were then. Okay, JJ, no lens flare, exactly right. Some large telescopes today do not have a tube. Well, I mean, you don't look through modern telescopes in the same way. It's all boring electronics. This was the era where you peered through the eyepiece, which is far better. So there's lots of interesting detail. He really does have an eye for the actual detail, which is really good. So I thought that was quite impressive. So yeah, and he's got, interesting enough, he then puts the astronomer into the position of the skeptic, which is quite good. So Ogilvy was full of speculation that night about the condition of Mars, but he scoffed at the vulgar idea of its inhabitants who were signalling to us. His idea was that meteorites might be falling in a heavy shower upon the planet, or that a huge volcanic explosion was in progress. He pointed out to me how unlikely it was that organic evolution had taken the same direction in two adjacent planets, which is actually likely to be correct. And this is what I hadn't realised. This is the quote that everyone associates with War of the Worlds, but it's incorrectly quoted. So everyone's got the Jeff Wayne version now. Jeff Wayne has subsumed the original, because the Jeff Wayne, of course, is the chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. But that's not what's in the original text. Okay, the original text says the chances against anything man-like on Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. So it's an entirely different thing. So Ogilvy never ever said the chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1. He didn't say that. He's been misquoted. Ogilvy said it was all, he was talking about evolution. So Jeff Wayne, you naughty man, you totally changed. Bam, bam, bam. The original meaning of the thing. The chances of Beatles coming are only 5 to 1 against, exactly. So that one just jumped out at me as kind of an interesting thing. Okay, so the chance of anything coming from Mars, that's not a verbatim quote. It never happened. It's not in the book. And Kirk never said beam me up, Scotty. He didn't. No, indeed. So hundreds of observers saw the flame that night and the night after about midnight, and again the night after, and so for 10 nights a flame each night. So basically that's again quite sensible, because what H.G. Wells has figured out, if you're going to point a cannon at the Earth and aim at the Earth with some sort of projectile thing, they're launching every 24 hours. So basically they're sending a ship every 24 hours. But that makes sense because Mars rotates roughly the same speed as Earth does, right? And its day is, or sol as it's called on Mars, is just over 24 hours long. So it would make sense that they were firing effectively once a day. And 10 nights, so they fired 10 shots. Why the shots ceased after the 10th, no one has attempted to explain. It may be the gases of the firing caused the Martians inconvenience. Who knows? Nice little details that you can sort of speculate on. That's quite good. Then another nice little piece here. Even the daily papers woke up to the disturbances at last, and popular notes appeared here, there, and everywhere concerning the volcanoes upon Mars. The serio-comic periodical Punch, which also still exists. Punch magazine, as it is called now, which is basically a satirical paper, which it was back then as well. I remember made happy use of it in the political cartoon, which they still do. It's just a nice bit of continuity. And then this is where he talks about missiles. So, and all unsuspected, those missiles the Martians had fired us drew earthward, rushing now at a pace of many miles a second, which again would be true, through the empty gulf of space, hour by hour and day, nearer and nearer. One night the first missile could then scarcely have been 10 million miles away. Okay, so they're close, and he's just out strolling with his wife, which is quite nice. Punch still exists. Actually think about it. Does it? Maybe it doesn't. I thought it did. Maybe Punch was it? Did it? Punch magazine? Did it stop? It's still a website. Final issue. No, it has closed down. Final issue 2002. There we go. It's it has gone, but it was running up again. Closing in 1992 for the first time, revived in 96, and then closed again in 2002. So it is historical. It was very much a thing. There we go. Interesting. So that's another thing we're learning. Anyway, so the Martians are on the way. So that's basically kind of the first chapter, right? He goes out for a walk with his wife, and he, as you do when you go out for a walk with your wife, I explained the signs of the zodiac to her, pointed out Mars, It was a warm night. Coming home, Chertsey and Isleworth passers by singing and playing music. There were lights in the upper houses, the windows. We went to bed. Everything was nice. Okay, this is a nice little turn of phrase as well. From the railway station in the distance came the sound of shunting trains, ringing and rumbling, softened almost into melody by the distance. Now that's a really nice turn of phrase, because if you've ever heard steam trains doing shunting up close, it's not a nice sound at all. It's like massive clanging metal, right? But I have heard that sort of effect in the distance, and it does have this very relaxing kind of tinkly, clunky, remote sound to it, which he's captured there in a really nice, softened almost into melody. He's exactly right. It's a lovely turn of phrase. It seems so safe and tranquil. Okay, well, bam, bam, bam. Okay, so it's actually quite good. I mean, it's not a very long chapter. I think that's the other thing, is how long is the entire thing? Let me just find out. I'm just going to scroll and grab the whole thing. So apologies if this is going to freak you out on the screen. Probably Private Eye. Yeah, I was probably thinking of Private Eye. I don't know when Private Eye started, but so there we go. If I just copy and paste that into Word, let's just see how long roughly that is. I've got a little bit of copyright blurb at the end there, which I don't need. Let's get rid of that. In fact, quite a lot of copyright blurb. The end of the book. There we go. Right, let's get ready. So the entire book is 60,000 words long, which is nothing really. I mean, I haven't even got going by 60,000 words. So it's quite impressively short, actually. It's almost a novella. It was serialized, so I'm assuming that each chapter was, and you can see the structure of the book there. Each chapter was serialized one at a time, maybe on a weekly basis. That was quite common with science fiction sort of stuff back then. So you read the first bit, and then you'd have to wait a week to get to the next bit. It's kind of like the early, tune in next week. But obviously before television, this was serialized in, presumably in some sort of pamphlet or newspaper. And then, Sean, you're quite right. So this is a documented indication of mansplaining, as I think it's called nowadays. I went for a walk with my wife. It was starlight, and I explained the signs of the zodiac to her because she was stupid, young, pretty, and ignorant, and she needed to know. So I pointed out Mars. That's Mars, my dear. What, the red one? Yes, the red one. Well done, dear. You can. I mean, I'm sure again, H.G. Wells was a perfectly decent bloke. I mean, I've no idea. We could dig into his life a bit more subsequent stream, but you can see the environment in which this was written. It's a product of its time. It is a product of its time, it's it's interesting. It is interesting. Glenn, when I was out at night a few weeks ago back at the Archery Club, I pointed out Mars to someone, saying, "Do you see the star that's reddish?" And they couldn't tell it was red. Some people, it takes a while to train your eyes to see star colours. Actually, an awful lot of people can't see them, but it's down to training. You have to train your eyes to, and you have to. The other thing, you have to wait for your eyes to adjust, because if your eyes aren't dark adapted, you can't see any colour anyway. You have to be out there for a little while, and some people need a bit longer. So there we go. She liked to talk of butterflies and lace doilies. She did. She probably did. I mean, his wife obviously feels very, very privileged to be married to the journalist. I could clearly see it was red. Ed. It was Ed, and it was red. Okay. Yeah, so and we get stronger women types later on in the stories, but I kind of get the impression that the journalist here is a sort of fairly well-to-do middle class kind of a fellow. So in 19th century environment, she was probably a very dutiful wife, I imagine. So interesting. But anyway, so again, another product of its time. The Falling Stars. So chapter 2. Okay, things start ramping up now. Then came the night of the first falling star. It was seen early in the morning, rushing over Winchester eastward. So he's got his geography right as well. So this is another example of the guy doing his homework properly. So if I show you Winchester, he hasn't just sort of chucked some names in. So basically, here's Winchester Cathedral, Winchester in the UK, which is, as you can see, is on the south coast of, well, not quite the coast, but the southern part of the UK. Here's London, it was seen over Winchester heading east, and it lands, obviously, as we know, in Woking, up here, quite close to London, on Horsell Common, which is just south of Woking, I think. Old Woking is there. There's now a golf club, which would have been. There's Whitmore Common. Where's Horsell Common? Is that up there? I'm not quite sure. Let's find if we can find it. Where's Horsell Common? It's just off the A245, which is there we go. Highly convenient for access now. The A245, of course, did not exist in the 19th century. There's Horsell Common. Horsell Common nowadays has a car park, which is quite useful. So I presume he lived around here. There you go. It's actually north of Woking, so he's got the meteor. It's kind of should be northeast, but easterly direction is probably okay. We'll give him that. And Ogilvy goes out to look for it. Okay. Who'd seen the shooting star and was persuaded that a meteorite lay somewhere on the common between Horsell, Ottershaw and Woking. So you can see Woking, there's the common, and there's Ottershaw up there. So, okay, so it's quite good. Nowadays, of course, there's a handy Tesco's Extra as well. And there's a good train service into London, which did exist at the time. Okay, so the train line here would have existed. And interesting enough, Maybury Road there, as you can see, which is alongside the train line, is referred to in the book. So that still exists. So there are some places that you can actually, if you've got any reason to do so, you can go and visit the actual locales of the book, which is always quite a nice thing to do. So all the places in here, are real. They are as described. They are correct for the period, which is good. What is a bit more interesting is the response to the landing of the thing. Okay, and it's called the thing for quite a long time. An enormous hole had been made by the impact of the projectile, so it's just landed. So these poor Martians really did they get launched from Mars in some sort of projectile gun, and then their spaceship doesn't so much make a landing as it just buries itself in the ground when it lands. It sort of comes in. So the Martians must have some amazing physiology to survive A, the takeoff, and B, the landing. Pretty brutal way of getting between planets, as far as I can work out. And that's why there's a sand bit on the common to this day. Is that right? Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. What's interesting here? So the description of it. I mean, it's always referred to as a cylinder, but I hadn't realised this bit. The uncovered part had the appearance of a huge cylinder caked over, so it's kind of covered in something, and its outline softened by a thick, scaly, dun-coloured incrustation. That's what dun-coloured is. And that's an old word as well. What's dun-coloured? Okay, so sort of browny tan. Okay, that's what dun is. So that's clearly a kind of old-fashioned thing. That's airbags, airbag deck. It had a diameter of about 30 yards. So that's pretty big, actually, isn't it? If you think about 30 yards. So I mean, that's much bigger than a house. Well, bigger than my house, anyway. That's just the diameter. So the length of this thing must have been maybe 100 feet. It's a chunky thing to have chucked through space, isn't it? So it's 30 yards in diameter. He doesn't mention how long it is. But he does say, Ogilvy approached the mass surprised at the size and more so at the shape, since most meteorites are rounded more or less completely. A stirring noise within the cylinder. Dun, dun, dun. He ascribed to the unequal cooling of its surface. It had not occurred to him that it might be hollow. Well, it's like 30... A cylinder 30 yards across. It's not... You think that's not going to be artificial? Seems a bit strange, this astronomer sometimes. But again, maybe not. And then they notice, of course, that it's the very slowly the circular top of the cylinder was rotating on its body, and such was a gradual movement. He uncovered, noticing a black mark had been near him 5 minutes ago, was now at the other side of the circumference, so it's rotating. 90 feet, 100 feet. Yeah, it's about 100. Well, 30 yards, that's 100 feet, isn't it? I mean, it's still a big old cylinder. The cylinder, then the thing came upon him in a flash. The cylinder was artificial, as opposed to those really unusual non-artificial cylinders that are travelling through space. Something in the cylinder was unscrewing the top! Exclamation mark. Now this is interesting. Look, this is again a product of its time. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash upon Mars. It's like, I think, even back then, I think most of the readers would probably have made that leap already. It's the first ever alien invasion. Maybe we should give Ogilvy a part. It is 3 feet to a yard. I was going to say. It's meters and yards. I get confused, isn't it? 3 feet is a yard. 3.3 feet to a meter, isn't it? Ogilvy is a bit slow, so that's that. I think we can justly give a little bit of criticism to Ogilvy here, considering he's supposed to be an astronomer. So probably one of the most educated men of his era. He's surprisingly slow at putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4, isn't he? The next thing is quite the next thing is quite interesting. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went to the cylinder to help turn. Quite what help he thought he was going to give. I mean, you think, okay, it's a 30. What was it? 30 foot. No, 30 yard. Was it 30 yards? 30 yards, yeah, so a diameter 30 yards. Okay, so it's 90 foot. 90 foot in diameter. And he thinks, I'll tell you what, I'll give it a hand unscrewing. What does he think he's going to do to a 90 foot cylindrical thing? Just get a crowbar in there. So, I mean, I quite like the instinctive reaction. I've got to help these guys get out, but I mean, really, a 90-foot cylinder. What's one man going to do? Hasn't he seen any of those movies? Let's jump in there and help get these things out. Fortunately, the dull radiation had rested him before he could turn his hands on the still glowing metal. So, okay, this thing is still glowing red hot. Okay. Which in itself is interesting, because obviously H.G. Wells has sort of figured that it's not crash landed, it's deliberately landed in this fashion, and it's come down through the atmosphere and it's still glowing hot. This is a nice little insight into Ogilvy's state of mind. At that he stood irresolute for a moment, then turned, scrambled out of the pit and set off running wildly into Woking, as you do. The time must then have been somewhere about 6 o'clock. He met a wagoner and tried to make him understand. So, of course, this is pre-cars. There's no cars on the road. But the tale he told, his appearance was so wild. His hat had fallen off into the pit. I mean, it's pretty bad when your hat falls off in the pit, right? I mean, I would definitely have been irresolute for a moment as well, I feel. His hat had fallen off the bit. That's how bad it was. Okay, that's how surprised he was at the Martian invading. He was out without his hat. It's pretty stern stuff. Okay. The man simply drove on. I'm not talking to you if you haven't got a hat. You're clearly a nutter. He was equally unsuccessful with the potman. I don't know what a potman does. Who was just unlocking the doors of the public house by Horsell Bridge. So 6 o'clock in the, it doesn't say in the morning or the evening. The little fellow thought he was a lunatic at large. Made an unsuccessful attempt to shut him into the tap room. I don't know what a tap room is for. But so there's a potman who has access to a tap room. Question. That sobered him up a little. When he saw Henderson, the London journalist, in his garden, he called over the palings, which presumably is some sort of panelling, I think, between gardens, and made himself understood. Henderson, he called, you saw that shooting star last night. Well, it's out on Horsell Common now. Good Lord, says Henderson. A fallen meteorite, that's good. But it's more than a meteorite. It's a cylinder, an artificial cylinder, man, and there's something inside. Henderson stood up with his spade in his hands. What's that? He said. He was deaf in one ear. Anyway, so after that, they've realised that they go back to the common, found the cylinder still lying in the same position. The sounds inside have now ceased. And a thin circle of bright metal showed between the top and the body of the same cylinder. Air was either entering or escaping at the rim with a thin sizzling sound. Okay, so again, points for H.G. Wells here is there's some sort of air pressurization going on, which is quite good. They listened, rapped on the scale, burnt metal with a stick. You know, are there any Martian invaders in the inside of this? Make yourself clear. Meeting with no response, they concluded that the man or men inside must be insensible or dead. Interesting that they assume it's men inside. Okay, I don't know if that's deliberately written like that, but of course the two men were quite unable to do anything. So anyway, so again, technology of the times here. So Henderson went into the railway station at once in order to telegraph the news to London, and the newspaper articles had prepared men's minds for the reception of the idea. So you know, this thing lands, and you know, it's quite interesting. There's no immediate alarm, which I think is lovely in telling about sort of 19th century England. Well, there's an artificial cylinder that's just landed in the middle of the common, but we'll probably get round to it tomorrow. Okay. It's very imperially British. I say, anybody in there? Dash irregular. Not even answering. The blighters. It's beautifully British, isn't it? And it's like there's no immediate reaction. Okay. It's like, well, okay, well, I'll tell you what. Let's repair to the railway station. I'll send a telegram. That'll sort it out. So anyway, so there we are on Horsell. So on to chapter 3, because it's good. It's still good. It still works, this story, even though obviously today is you know, it has been superseded by events a little bit. But now this is interesting that the following morning, okay, so I found a little crowd of perhaps 20 people surrounding a huge hole in which the words got about by this point to the occupants of Woking. Henson and Ogilvy were not there. I think they perceived that nothing was to be done for the present and had gone away to breakfast at Henderson's house. Can you imagine that in an alien invasion movie? Where are the guys who discovered this thing? Ah, well, they're you see the house just down there? They're having breakfast, old chap. But it's correct for the period. It is. I mean, Commander C. you're exactly right. It is correct for the period. This is how people would have reacted. Well, I can't do anything about it at the moment. I'm not skipping breakfast for that. It's just beautiful. There were 4 or 5 boys sitting on the edge of the pit, their feet dangling, amusing themselves until I stopped them by throwing stones at the giant man. Let's see if we can whack it with some stones. Brilliant. Also, bystanders, there were some cyclists, a jobbing gardener, a girl carrying a baby, Greg the Butcher and his little boy. So Greg the Butcher actually gets a name. 2 or 3 loafers. So presumably, I'm assuming he means by loafers people haven't got anything better to do, and some golf caddies. Unless loafers is part of playing golf, and golf caddies who are accustomed to hang about the railway station. So it's just. There was very little talking. Now the next line is very telling. Okay, few of the common people in England had anything but the vaguest astronomical ideas in those days. Common people. Loafers in context is layabout. Okay, just people had nothing better to do. So the common people. In England, those common people don't know anything about astronomy. Those common people. So I fancy the popular expectation of a heap of charred corpses was disappointed at this inanimate bulk. So everyone's been told, "Oh, there's some dead people on the common. Let's go and have a look at the dead people." But it's really disappointing. It's just a crashed alien spaceship. Dull, yeah. That's. Loafers of shoes. BP is before Patrick Moore. I'm not sure many people today know much about astronomy. No, you are quite correct there, Alan. You are quite correct. Even some science fiction writers or sometimes don't know about great astronomy. Common people don't know much. There's still a lot of them about. Dear. I clambered into the pit and fancied I heard faint movement under my feet. The top had certainly ceased to rotate. And this bit's sort of telling. This sort of puts it in context. It was only when I got close to it that the strangeness of the object was at all evident to me. At the first glance, it was really no more exciting than an overturned carriage or a tree blown across the road. So that's quite interesting. That's how H.G. Wells is trying to portray this. Most people are reacting to it as if it's just a minor accident. The tree blew down in the storm or the carriage overturned. It looked like a rusty gas float. I don't know what that would be. What was a gas float, I wonder? Some sort of storage container for gas? I don't know what he would have meant by a gas float, but it's interesting that he says it looked like a gas float. So people are sort of, I guess, assuming from a dirigible, maybe. Oh yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe like a gas bag from a dirigible or something, and that's what it looks like. So people just aren't educated or aware or intelligent enough to notice that it's actually otherworldly. And he kind of doubles down on that here. It says it required a certain amount of scientific education to perceive that the grey scale of the thing was no common oxide, and that yellowish white metal that gleamed in the crack between the lid and the slit had an unfamiliar hue. Extraterrestrial had no meaning for most of the onlookers. So that's quite nicely, he's sort of pitching it in there to basically saying nobody realises that this thing has come from Mars. It's just a thing that's crashed. No, Wintermute, that's right. An overturned carriage 30 yards across, made of metal. But yeah, maybe most people are assuming it's some sort of crashed airship or something. And he goes on to say, at the time it was quite clear in my own mind the thing had come from the planet Mars, but I judged it improbable that it contains any living creature, which is not bad, actually. I thought the unscrewing might be automatic. Again, that's quite reasonable. But in spite of Ogilvy, I still believe that there were men in Mars. And my mind, this is really interesting here. You could have written a totally different story at this point. My mind ran fancifully on the possibilities, it containing a manuscript, on the difficulties of translation that might arise, and whether we would find coins or models in it and so forth. So yeah, if we could look inside the Martian cylinder, what would we find? I felt an impatience to see it open. So about 11, as nothing seemed to be happening, I walked back, full of thoughts, to my home. Again, well, I know it's a Martian cylinder and stuff, but nothing's happening, so I'm just going to walk back home. And then the evening papers are slowly catching up with this. A day has passed now. Message received from Mars, a remarkable story from Woking, and so forth. And all the observatories were now looking at things. And again, more descriptions which are contemporary to the time here. So half a dozen flies or more from the Woking station. I'm assuming it doesn't mean flies, as in bzzz. I'm assuming this is some sort of carriage or lightweight, cheap carriage from the working station, standing by the road by the sandpits. A basket chaise, which is some sort of conveyance as well, from Cobham, and a rather lordly carriage. So obviously there's different classes of people coming to inspect the thing that's crashed on the common. And quite a heap of bicycles. So a large number of people must have walked in, despite the heat of the day, from Woking to Chertsey. Now that's quite interesting. How far is that? Okay, let's go from Chertsey. So people are walking that distance. Okay, well, it's not that far. It's 12 minutes by car. It's like 6 miles, but it's a reasonable old trek for people to do just to go and have a look at something, isn't it? So people were walking about 6 miles, and even, dare I say it, one or two gaily dressed ladies amongst the others. Even the gaily dressed ladies have come down to have a look. To be fair, there's only so long you can look at the big metal thing. Yeah, I suppose that is true, but especially if you don't know what it is. The entrepreneurs are in straight away. An enterprising sweet stuff dealer, presumably selling ice creams or something, in the Cobham Road had sent up his son with a barrow load of green apples and ginger beer. Probably with the prices. Get your Martian ginger beer here. So that's quite good. During the American Civil War, people used to go up to set up picnics to watch the battles. So not much to do back then. Martian t-shirts, yeah. Going to the edge of the pit, I found it occupy a group of half dozen men. Henderson, Ogilvy, and the tall, fair-haired man I after learned was Stent, the Astronomer Royal. Okay, so that's a rank of astronomer that did exist at the time, again, which is correct. Several workmen now with spades and pickaxes, and Stent is giving directions. He was standing on the cylinder, which was now evidently much cooler. Good. His face crimson and steaming with perspiration. So they're trying to dig it out at this point. The growing crowd, he said, is becoming a serious impediment to the excavation, especially the boys. Okay, so they haven't set up any kind of... There's no perimeter, right? They haven't put up a little cordon around it or anything. They've just waded in there and go, right, we're going to dig this out. They wanted a light railing put up to help keep the people back. What's he asking? Okay, so that's what he wanted. Okay, I'm very glad to do as he asked. I became one of the privileged spectators within the contemplated enclosure. And so Lord Hilton is on his way down, whoever Lord Hilton is. Again, very British here. As it was then about 5:15, I mean, pretty late in the day to be honest, I went home and had some tea. I walked to the station to waylay him. I meet him. I must admit, waylaying people is not something that's very common nowadays. You don't waylay people very often anymore. But that's what you said in the time. So it's got lovely period touches, which is truthful. He nearly missed his tea. I mean, 4:45 is pretty late for tea actually. But there we go. Okay, so when I returned, so this is where it starts getting interesting. When I returned to the common, the sun was setting. Scattered groups were hurrying from the direction of Woking. 1 or 2 persons were returning. The crowd around the pit had increased. There were raised voices. Keep back, keep back. I can hear Stent's voice now shouting about stuff. A boy came running towards me. It's a moving, he said, the music passed. A screw in and a screwing out. I don't like it. I'm a going home, I am. Nice little bit of slightly cockney sounding. I'm a going home, I am. And 200 or 300 people now jostling there. And an interesting comment here. The 1 or 2 ladies there being by no means the least active. He's fallen in the pit, cried someone. Get back. So someone's been pushed into the pit. A young man, a shop assistant in Woking, I believe he was, standing on the cylinder and trying to scramble out of the hole again. The crowd have pushed him in. Nobody's trying to help him get out of the pit for some strange reason. And then this is the interesting bit again in terms of the description. The end of the cylinder was being screwed out from within. Nearly 2 feet of shining screw projected. Somebody blundered against me and I narrowly missed being pitched on top of the screw. As I turned, And as it did so, the screw must have come out, for the lid of the cylinder fell upon the gravel with a ringing concussion. So that must have been quite a bang. Okay, so this presumably this cylinder is like I say, 30 yards across with 2 feet of screws. It's a big end cap, isn't it? All this, governor, strike a light, no mistake. Step in time, step in time, step in time. Cool, blimey, gov. I know, Dick Van Dyke, get your high up. So there's this massive hole then. I stuck my elbow into the person behind me and turned my head towards the thing again. For a moment, the circular cavity seemed perfectly black. So this is another dun moment. So it's interesting he chose a screw mechanism, okay, because, you know, I mean, this is before anybody would have envisioned airlocks or, you know, hermetic seals or hydraulic doors or anything like that. It is interesting to think, okay, how would we have done it any different if we'd been around at the time? What is I'm assuming he's thinking of, you know, the spaceship needs to have an airtight seal, and a screw thread was perhaps his best way of thinking that's how it could be done, and yet still obviously be able to come out. A push fit would have popped out exactly under pressure, so a screw kind of does make sense. In some ways, as a mechanism to hold the air in, using kind of 19th century technology, because I mean they would have had pressurized, steam engines, for example, and things to hold a lot of pressure. So he would have been aware of that. So a screw bung would have been used to keep steam in, so why not keep space out? Exactly, Sean. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, he's probably referring again here to technology of the time that he was familiar with. He wouldn't have known about, hermetically sealed doors, and that kind of technology didn't exist. So he's got nothing else to refer to. But so how would you, if he knows about the problem of a vacuum of space, and yet you have to make a device which can open when it gets there, a screw thread does kind of make sense. Given, you know, the sort of technology that was prevalent at the time. So I think we have to give him a bit of credit for a screw thread here. It sounds a bit weird to us now. Why not have a screw cap on a spaceship? But it does sort of make sense in the context of the time. And then, you know, so this is when it gets exciting. So everyone was expecting to see a man emerge, possibly something little unlike us terrestrial men, but in all essentials a man. I certainly know I did. But looking, and this is the first description we have of the Martians, I presently saw something stirring within the shadow, greyish, billowy movements, one above another, and then 2 luminous discs like eyes. He doesn't necessarily say they are eyes, but they are. There's something resembling a little grey snake about the thickness of a walking stick coiled up out of the writhing middle and wriggled in the air towards me. And then another, so it's like they've got tentacles. And there's a description of why the Martians are like this later on. So he's not just made them monstrous. We find out a little bit more about their anatomy later on in the book, which is quite good. And the screw opening drags out the time. I suppose it does. That's a tension thing, maybe, Alan. That's quite clever. If H.G. Wells thought, I can get away with this because it's scientifically plausible and it allows me to drag the tension out a little bit longer. That's quite a nice little literary device, isn't it? I say, so they're going to help keep these idiots back. We don't know what the confounded thing is, you know. So it's got tentacles sort of thing. There was a loud shriek from a woman behind, and then keeping my eyes fixed upon the cylinder still, from which other tentacles were now projecting. Okay, so there's, you kind of get the idea. There was a general movement backwards. I saw the shopman struggling still on the edge of the pit. And I found myself alone and saw people on the other side of the pit running off, Stent among them. So the Astronomer Royal has legged it. I looked again at the cylinder and ungovernable terror gripped me. I stood petrified and staring. Okay, so that's actually a little bit of a small example there of not good writing. Okay, that's a bit of tell don't show creeping in there. So we should give H.G. Wells a little rap on the knuckles for that one. This is good though. A big greyish rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. Okay, so that's a nice description. It kind of gives you a nasty, lumpen, slow, ugly, kind of heaving mass of unpleasantness trying to pull itself out of this cylinder. Two large dark-coloured eyes regarded me steadfastly. The mass that framed them, the head of the thing was rounded and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva. Nice. It's all sort of slobbery and everything. The whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively. It's all kind of wibbling and wobbling there. It's really good. A lank tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder, and another swayed in the air. Those who had never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath a wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of this mouth, the gorgon groups of tentacles and the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, and the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the Earth. So that's a nice little piece of description as well. So he's, again, a good bit of research. The gravity on Earth is 3 times as strong as it is on Mars, so the Martians are going to be hampered by the gravity. Totally would be the case. Sounds like me first thing in the morning. Is that the incessant quivering of the mouth or the gorgon group of tentacles there, Commander Cedarweather? Or is that information that we're not privy to at this point in time? Above all, this is nice as well, above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes that were once vital, intense, inhuman, crippled, and monstrous. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of the tedious movements unspeakably nasty. Nasty is a weird word to use there. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. Okay, so the Martians are giving off this bad news vibe, which is quite good. So yeah, he's leaving us in no uncertain terms that these are unpleasant fellows coming out of this spacecraft. Now this is also interesting. So I don't know. It's quite hard to get from the description of the attitude of this spacecraft. Now it's landed on the ground. Suddenly the monster vanished. It had toppled over the brim of the cylinder and fallen into the pit with a thud-like fall of a great mass of leather. So sort of a sound. I heard it gave a particular thick cry, and forthwith another of those creatures appeared darkly in the deep shadow of the aperture. And then everyone runs away. Okay. So and as we get to sort of the closing part of the stream, probably where we'll stop, the heat ray. Now this is good, okay, the heat ray. Given the technology of the time, I think the heat ray is a remarkable piece of science fiction writing. Okay, so to start with, it's they're talking a little bit about here and the fact that those are ugly brutes. Etc. 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 Ogilvy rather sensibly here. He's Ogilvy Stent, who's the Astronomer Royal, and Henderson, who's the sort of Lord chap presumably in charge of Woking, put together a little deputation. So a deputation is just a group that has an agenda, basically. So there had been a hasty consultation. Since the Martians were evidently, in spite of their repulsive forms, intelligent creatures, it had been resolved to show them by approaching them with signals that we too were intelligent. I think perfectly reasonable thing for us to do. Okay, I mean we know what's going to happen, right? But we're going to try and talk to a posse for our American friends, right? A deputation is what we call it in the UK. A posse in the American. They put up a flag. Flutter went the flag first to the right and then to the left. Okay. It was too far for me to recognise anyone there, but afterwards I learned that Ogilvy, Stent and Henderson were with the others in this attempt at communication, which sounds like a perfectly sensible thing to do. This little group had in its advance dragged inward, so to speak, the circumference of and this little sentence here is a very 19th century way of saying something. Okay. using far too many words to accomplish what you actually need to say. Okay, so this little group had, in its advance, dragged inward, so to speak, the circumference of the now almost complete circle of people, and a number of dim black figures followed it at discreet distance. It's like, really? You could write that in a much more simple way. It's a posse, not a posy. How do you pronounce it? Is it posse? Posse? I don't know. Posse? Is it a posse? Or even the posy? No, it's not a posy. Definitely not a posy. Suddenly, H.G. Wells' editor had clearly not told them to remove adverbs. Maybe that piece of editorial advice came along much later. Okay, it's pronounced posse but spelled pos. Right. Okay, bear that in mind. Suddenly there was a flash of light, and a quantity of luminous greenish smoke came out of the pit in 3 distinct puffs, which drove up one after the other straight into the still air. The smoke, or flame perhaps would have been the better word for it, was so bright that the deep blue sky overhead and the hazy stretches of brown common towards Chertsey, set with black pine trees, seemed to darken abruptly as these puffs arose, and to remain the darker after the dispersal. At the same time, a faint hissing sound became audible. So actually, it's not entirely clear what the Martians are doing at this point, but they've got some green fire going on. Forthwith. Why don't we say forthwith anymore? That's an excellent word. Forthwith. It's a word that you don't need at all. Flashes of actual flame would be fine. If you search the whole text for something, maybe suddenly was a new word back in the 19th century. I got to chuck a few of those in. A bright glare. Okay, so forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame, and it was as if each man was suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. Then, by the light of their own destruction, I saw them staggering and falling, and their supporters turning to run. Okay, so it's just like they just get incinerated. Nice. Okay, so the Martians are implacably hostile. I stood staring, not yet realising that this death was leaping from man to man in that distant little crowd. All I felt was it was something very strange. Certainly something very strange. An almost noiseless and blinding flash of light, and the man fell headlong and lay still. As the unseen shaft of heat passed over them, pine trees burst into fire. Every dry furze bush became one dull thud, a mass of flames. And far away towards Nap Hill, I saw the flashes of trees and hedges and wooden buildings suddenly set alight. So what's interesting about this is that the heat ray isn't just... It's not a flamethrower, like it is often shown in the movie versions of War of the Worlds. It's a beam. It's a beam weapon. And it doesn't really have a range limit. A bunch of men bursting into flames that's very strange. Very strange indeed. I need to have a cup of tea now. But no, this is a beam weapon. It's not a flamethrower. It's a beam weapon. You can see it almost noiseless, and the unseen shaft of heat passed over them. Pine trees burst into fire. Every dry bush became one that dull thud of massive flames. And far away towards Nap Hill, I see the flashes of trees and hedges and wooden buildings suddenly set alight. So it's travelling at the speed of light. It's a beam weapon. So where it misses the immediate vicinity and keeps travelling, it hits things far away. So that's quite interesting. It was sweeping around swiftly and steadily, this flaming death, this invisible, inevitable sword of heat. It was as if an invisible yet intensely heated finger were drawn through the heather between me and the Martians, and all along a curving line beyond the sand pits in the dark, the ground smoked and cracked. So it's an amazing description of a weapon which didn't exist at the time, because it's the weaponry of the period is guns, is cannons. This is before this is before the machine gun. This is before laser weaponry. This is before you're talking explosives, you're talking cannon, you're talking shells. Is the weaponry technology of the age. So to imagine a beam weapon, a portable beam weapon of this type, I think is an amazing leap for a science fiction writer to take. Now, he does go on. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. It's in the beginning of the next chapter. Okay, this is really good. This is a science fiction writer really pushing the envelope, shall we say? Which is a stupid turn of phrase, but there we go. It's still a matter of wonder how the Martians are able to slay men so swiftly and so silently. Many think that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. Now this is 1897. This is being written. Generate intense heat in a chamber of practically zero absolute non-conductivity. So he's hit upon some very good physics here, some amazing physics, of potentially preempting supercooled superconductive things, right? Very, very impressive indeed. He must have had even knowledge of or access to some proper physicists who knew their stuff of the era, and who themselves were probably speculating on what type of weaponry might be created in the next 50, 100 years. What weapons could possibly exist. So he's got a lot of access. I've got a lot of knowledge behind the scenes here. This, I think, is very, very impressive. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the parabolic mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. So he's referencing known technologies, but it's a focused beam of energy. Okay, but no one has absolutely proved these details. However it is done, it is certain that a beam of heat is the essence of the matter. So basically, what he's talking about is basically an infrared laser. That's what the heat ray is. It's an infrared laser, an incredibly potent infrared laser. Heat, invisible instead of visible light. Whatever is combustible flashes into flame at its touch. Lead runs like water, it softens cracks and melts glass, and when it falls upon water, incontinently that explodes into steam. So this is an incredible piece of science fiction invention. He's basically invented an infrared laser using his imagination in the year 1897. That's amazing. It really is amazing. I think that is an incredibly impressive example of imagining a sci-fi. Maybe it's. It does talk about heat a lot. You could talk about microwave. I think infrared, to me, sounds more likely here, because a microwave. Microwave would work on anything with water molecules in it, wouldn't it? But I don't think it's very easy to focus microwaves to a parallel beam. So I've always envisioned this as an infrared laser, effectively, it's basically an infrared laser beam which is going to just obliterate everything. It just chucks so much energy onto the target that it just heats up and melts or burns. Madame Curie was doing radiation stuff around this time, so they knew about they knew about radiation, but it was clearly something that he basically worked upon. So a maser is a focused microwave. I don't know. I mean, how effective is a microwave maser at cooking things? I mean, will it melt anything? Because he does talk about their lead runs like water. Whatever's combustible flashes into flame at its touch. So that again tends to me to talk about infrared, because if you fire microwaves at lead, they're not going to do anything, surely, are they? I don't know. I mean, what are masers used for? And it's very easy nowadays, post Star Wars and Star Trek, and we talk about phasers and lasers and all that kind of good stuff. Nowadays it's pretty hard to come up with a new sci-fi weapon, but it was no different back then in some ways. So for him to come up with this concept, I think is quite sort of pretty damned impressive. I'm impressed. This particular piece here is, for me, one of the kind of the really standout bits of the book. He has invented a high-tech super weapon, which we have we can just about appreciate the principles around maybe how it works, and that's the best we can do. Sounds like my microwave. Lots of stuff bursting into flames. Don't try this at home, kids. Microwave application for stimulated emission of radiation. So maser. So that's similar to a laser, isn't it? Anyway, so we have a heat ray, and the only thing, of course, left, which sort of sets the tone for the first part of this book, is the next bit, which is the arrival of the Martian fighting machines. So that happens a little bit further on. So let's just skip onwards to that bit. This bit is so British as well. It's so about a period of time. I startled my wife at the doorway, so haggard was I. You look like you've had a tough time, dear. I went into the dining room, sat down, and drank some wine. We're past the tea. We're onto the wine now. The Times and the Daily Telegraph are insisting upon stuff. So the fighting begins. Right. So where is the first mention of the fighting machine? Let's just see if I can find it. Okay, so there's a bit of a storm. So it takes a while to get to the fighting machine here. Anyway, Maybury Hill. Right, here we go. Here's the initial description of the tripod. And this thing I saw, how can I describe it? A monstrous tripod higher than many houses, striding over the young pine trees and smashing them aside in its career. So that's an interesting turn of phrase. That's quite old-fashioned. Aside in its career, i.e. it's careering forwards, i.e. moving quickly. A walking engine of glittering metal striding now across the heather, articulate ropes of steel dangling from it. So it's got appendages that are made of steel or metal, doing things. The clattering tumult of its passing, mingling with the riot of the thunder. So it's quite a noisy machine. A flash, and it came out vividly, heeling over one way with 2 feet in the air, to vanish and reappear almost instantly, it seemed, with the next a flash 100 yards nearer. Okay, so it moved pretty fast. Can you imagine a milking stool tilted and bowled violently along the ground? That was the impression these instant flashes gave. But instead of the milking stool, imagine a great body of machinery on a tripod stand. And so he doesn't see it too clearly for a moment. And then, seen nearer, the thing was incredibly strange, for it was no mere insensate. So insensate means unconscious, or that sort of vibe. It's not just a machine driving a machine. It was, with a ringing metallic pace and long, flexible, glittering tentacles, swinging and rattling about its strange body. It picked its road as it went striding along. The brazen hood that surmounted it moved to and fro with the inevitable suggestion of a head looking about. So when he says a hood, in the context of the time, a hood was much more like a helmet. So he's kind of got this idea of this sort of swinging turret almost on top of the tripod, which is basically where the Martian is. Behind the main body was a mass of white metal like a gigantic fisherman's basket, and puffs of green smoke squirted from the joints and the limbs as the monster swept past. So the green smoke is some sort of byproduct of how it works. Interesting that he chooses a tripod. So that's quite interesting. And then he, all sorts of bad stuff is happening. He doesn't get a good view of it again until a bit later on. Here he starts thinking about it again here. So they seemed amazingly busy. I began to ask myself what they could be. Were they intelligent mechanisms? Such a thing I felt was impossible. Or did the Martians sit within each, ruling, directing, using, much as a man's brain sits and rules his body? I began to compare the things to human machines, asked myself for the first time in my life how an ironclad or a steam engine would seem to an intelligent lower animal. So you kind of give the, the comparison there. Later this and this is quite interesting. This is how they kind of construct the tripods. So at the time the firing was going on, so basically the army's turned up now and they're trying to shell the second cylinder was arrived and they're trying to shell it by firing at it. At the time the firing was going on across the common, it was said the first party of Martians were crawling slowly towards their second cylinder under cover of a metal shield. So they've got the defence that they've built. But the shield staggered up on tripod legs and became the first of the fighting machines. So they constructed a shield first, and then within the shield, the Martian fighting machine unfolds and becomes the tripod. Then basically the artilleryman relates as the limber gunners went to the rear, his horse trod in the rabbit hole and came down, throwing him into regression. So he survives because he falls off his horse. At the same moment, the gun exploded behind him, the ammunition blew up, and there was fire all about him, and he found himself lying on a heap of charred dead men and dead horses. So the fighting machines have the tripod. The tripod has the heat ray as part of their mechanism. Basically the heat ray wipes things out, and they don't just wipe out the military staff. What's interesting here is the giant saved Woking station and its cluster of houses until the last, and then in a moment the heat ray was brought to bear and the town became a heap of fiery ruins. So the Martians don't just wipe out the artillery guys and the people. They take out the whole of Woking. Woking is gone. Woking is toast. Woking is history. Woking has been eviscerated from the map. The Martians have entirely destroyed Woking. And then the thing shut off the heat ray and turning its back upon the artillery began to waddle away. And as it did so, a second glittering titan built itself out of the pit. So, boom. So they obviously didn't like Woking. And then at this point, everyone starts running and trying to get away. So, and then Weybridge and Shepperton. So what's interesting here, if you look at the map again, they start off here in here's Woking, here's Horsell Common, and the creatures are heading. They've gone through Ottershaw. They take out Woking straight on. They head to Weybridge and Shepperton. So which way are they heading? Well, they're heading into London, which of course would have been the biggest city on the earth at the time. So they're basically the Martians are heading towards London, which is quite cool. So it proceeds on quite a lot. And it's worth a read because the dialogue actually here is pretty good. It's not bad for the time, but they do managed to shoot one down. I was quite surprised by this because you get the impression from all the other stories that we're never successful at all. But they manage to destroy one somewhere along here. I don't know quite where it is, but I was reading it and there's an interesting little, that's an interesting little bit. Giants in armour, sir, 100 feet high, 3 legs and a body like aluminum, with a mighty great head in a hood, sir. Get out, said the lieutenant. What confounded nonsense. You'll see, sir, they carry a kind of box, sir, that shoots fire and strikes you dead. What do you mean, a gun? No, sir. It's quite a good, nice little bit. It's sort of conversation I can think of is quite realistic, actually. So somewhere down here they do manage to shoot back, and so then it hits Chertsey. Okay, so we've lost Chertsey by this. Chertsey's fallen. There we go. Here it is. I gave a cry of astonishment and saw, I thought, nothing of the other 4 Martian monsters, because there's 4 of them by now. My intention was riveted upon the nearer instant. Simultaneously, 2 other shells burst in the air near the body as their hood twisted round in time to receive, but not in time to dodge the 4th shell. The shell burst clean in the face of the thing. The hood bulged, flashed, and was whirled off in a dozen tattered fragments of red flesh and glittering metal. Hit! Yay! We got one. The living intelligence of the Martian within the hood was slain and smashed to the 4 winds of heaven, and the thing was now but a mere intricate device of metal whirling to destruction. It drove in a straight line, incapable of guidance, and struck the tower of Shepperton Church, smashing it down as the impact battering ram might have done. Swerved aside, blundered and collapsed with tremendous force into the river out of his sight. Okay, so we got one, right, early on. So that's good. And then the famous bit, of course, and we'll finish up with this bit because everyone knows this bit. It's probably the best bit. In terms, so London, everyone in London panics. The Martians release some black dust, which is poisonous, black smoke, which his brother relates, I think. And then everyone basically tries to abandon London, tries to get to the coast to evacuate. And then the Thunder Child, which of course is the famous scene, very well done in Jeff Wayne's. So the Thunder Child is sitting in the Thames, as I understand it, about a couple of miles ironclad, very low in the water, like a waterlogged ship. And this was the ram Thunder Child. Now I looked this up. It's a torpedo ram, which is a type of boat. So it's sitting out here somewhere, and the Martians are coming down somewhere around here. It's not entirely clear where this is now. So, okay, they came onto the Essex coast to Harwich and Walton and Clacton. So this is Harwich, Walton and Clacton. So where's Clacton? Let's see if we can find out where this is. Clacton on Sea. There we go. Oh, it's actually right up there. Wow, okay. So that's Clacton. That's Essex coast, yeah. Okay, so and let's go for Shoebury. Where's Shoebury? I don't know. Haven't heard of some of these places. Shoebury. That's Southend-on-Sea. Okay, so basically there we go. That's Shoebury. So basically all along this coast here is where we're basically evacuating from. Lovely lines here again. British Empire stuff. At the sight of the sea, Mrs. Elphinstone, in spite of the assurances of her sister-in-law, gave way to panic. She had never been out of England before. She would rather die than trust herself friendless in a foreign country, and so forth. She seemed, poor woman, to imagine that the French and the Martians might prove very similar. It's just... That's so British Empire. Oh dear. Lovely. So anyway, and Blackwater, I've been to Blackwater. That is... Yes, there's so basically it's this whole area here is where we're evacuating from. So and then so on the low Essex coast was getting blue and hazy when the Martian appeared, advancing along the muddy coast in the direction of Foulness. Excellent. And then so the Thunder Child. Okay, so a torpedo ram Thunder Child steaming headlong coming to the rescue of the threatened shipping. So. What's interesting here is that Thunderchild appears to be alone, so it seems to be the only vessel involved in this attack. But later on, so that's where the Thunderchild's on its way in. Down here, after the Thunderchild's demise, sorry spoilers, but where is it? Somewhere. Yeah, okay, so here, and I think this is an H.G. Wells continuity error, is that it says here, but the ironclads to seaward were now quite close and standing in towards the shore past the steamboat, which implies there are a bunch of other warships somewhere, but they're not referenced before as far as I can find, having read through it. So it's like it appears that Thunderchild was part of a fleet, but for whatever reason, Thunderchild decided to attack on its own, and the rest of the military stood back. So not quite sure what was going on here. So anyway, Thunderchild charges at the Martians, and you saw three of them now close together, standing out far to sea. The tripod supports are almost entirely submerged, so the tripods are now standing in deep water. They appeared less formidable than the huge iron bulk in whose wake the steamer was pitching so hopeless. So the Thunderchild has roared past. So in the torpedo ram of that era, it looks like this. Alas, the Thunderchild isn't a real ship. But it was based upon... it's a fictional ironclad torpedo ram of the Royal Navy. So this is the sort of thing that it was. There we go. There's not very many pictures of this type of ship. It's a torpedo ram. So there's a torpedo. It can fire a torpedo out the front. There's a different view of the ship, which, interesting enough, here, it's not a huge vessel, and it's not a classic assault ship, really, the sort of thing. Okay, so the ironclads couldn't get close to the shore, but Thunderchild could. Okay, so they couldn't come into the shallow water, but they couldn't shell the Martians from range. So maybe that's it. Okay, so that's quite cool. Thunderchild goes in there, all heroic like, and the Martians fire some black smoke at it, and the ironclad dives clear of that. They saw the gauntlet figure separating, rising out of the water. They retreated shore. One of them raised the camera-like generator of the heat ray, pointed it obliquely downward, and a bank of steam sprang from the water it touched. It must have driven through the iron of the ship's side like a white-hot iron rod through paper. A flicker of flame went up for the rising steam, then the Martian reeled and staggered, and in another moment he was cut down. The great body of water and steam shot high into the air. The guns of the Thunderchild sounded through the reek, going off one after the other, and one shot splashed the water close by the steamer. Okay, so it's firing randomly, so it seems. So no one heeded that very much. The sight of the Martians collapsed. So basically, one of the it says up here, the Thunderchild fired no gun, but simply drove full speed towards him. It's probably her not firing that enabled her to get so near the enemy as she did. They didn't know what to make of her. One shell, and they would have sent her to the bottom fork with the heat ray. So it seems to me that the Thunderchild rams basically rams the Martian out of existence. And then at the sight of the Martian's collapse, the captain on the bridge yelled inarticulately, and all the crowding passengers on the steamer shouted together. And then they yelled again. For surging out beyond the white tunnel, it drove something long and black, flames streaming from its middle parts, and its ventilators and funnels spouting fire. It's like, yes. She was still alive still. The steering gear, it seems, was still intact and her engines were working. She headed straight for a second Martian and was within 100 yards when the heat ray came to bear. And then with a violent thud and the blinding flash, her decks, her funnels leapt inward. The Martian staggered with the violence of her explosion. In another moment, the flaming wreckage, still driving forward with the impetus of its pace, had struck him and crumbled him like a thing of cardboard. Two, yelled the captain. So good old Thunderchild got two of the Martians before succumbing. And then the third Martian is hidden by the steam, and by the time everything comes out, there's no sign of anything. So Thunderchild did a valiant. I'm interested about the ironclads not being able to get close enough to the shore to show you. Just thought they could do some sort of long range shooting, but there we go. The ironclads were seaward, were quite close and standing in towards the shore past the steamboat. So maybe they're being a protective flotilla of things trying to escort the steamships out. So there we go. I mean, so Thunderchild valiantly dies and kills two. So we got three of them. It's not bad. That's the end of book one. And book two, if you like, the second part, is the Earth under the Martians. So yeah, the invasion is complete. the British Empire has fallen to the Martians, ta-da! And from there on. So yes, it's so in hindsight, and Drew, don't forget the satellite launch from Cornwall. Yes, so in 2 hours, the UK is going to be launching a rocket into space on the back of a 747. So that should be quite something. So if you're still up, it's probably worth a watch to see how that goes. I think technically it's not technically a launch from British soil, although I suppose it is because the 747 is taking off from an airport and then launching into space somewhere south of Ireland, I think. So it's quite exciting for us. War of the Worlds, an extremely well written book and still very accessible, I think, for today. It reads in a much more modern way than you'd necessarily expect a novel written in 1897. So if you haven't read it, do read it from end to end. It's actually definitely worth it. It still stands up pretty well today, even in a modern context. Yes, there's some 19th century stuff which you have to kind of read in the context of its time, and yes, it's of its time clearly, in terms of all sorts of things. But it's good. It's well worth the read, and I think it stands up well in the context of modern times. So it gets a good thumbs up from me. So hopefully you enjoyed that wander through the War of the Worlds. The airplane's taking off in 2 minutes, so we better get off the air and allow you to pop over and watch the aircraft. I think it's really good. War of the Worlds. I think H.G. Wells did a fantastic job here. It's a very, very nice story. What's the next one? So I think we'll stick with H.G. Wells. Let's go and do The Time Machine next. So go and find The Time Machine by H.G. Wells as well. And we'll stick with H.G. Wells, and we'll do The Time Machine next week. So there we go. So we'll just wander through and get as far through as we can. So The Time Machine. Where can we watch the rocket? I don't know. Where is it? Is it on YouTube and being broadcast? It must be. There we go. You can watch it on the BBC, the Telegraph, Sky News. Just Google it. You'll find it. It's all over there. Right, my friends. Be good. Chances of anything coming from Mars, clearly it's not 1,000,000 to 1, as we discovered. But take it easy, be good, and I will see you next week. Have yourself a fantastic week ahead, and fingers crossed for the UK's space launch. Take care, my friends. Be good, and I'll see you soon.